with Jessie Tu. Jessie is a writer from Western Sydney. She is a journalist at the moment working for Women's Agenda, and we're going to talk in a moment about what she writes about there. But she's also formerly trained to be a classical violinist, and now she's also a poet, and she's now a first-time or a debut novelist with her book A Lonely Girl is a Dangerous Thing, published by Allen Unwin. Hello, Jessie. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
That's okay. Thank you. We've had a couple of attempts to get this done, and here we are at last. So, doing the COVID thing, and I'm actually going to ask you about COVID later on, because your book they talk in your book or in the publicity about your book, they say it's about three things. And I know it's about more than that, but they say it's about sex, race, and loneliness. Does that seem fair?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the nature of loneliness has probably changed a little bit in current lockdown. So we'll come back and talk about that in a minute. But tell us about the kind of writing you mostly do at the moment at Women's Agenda. I've noticed that you've written about women in career, gender pay gaps, women in politics, culture, sociology, science. It sounds like a pretty good all-round journalist job, right?
It is, and what's so fantastic is about it is that it's a female-owned company, private media company, and so we write news events and we cover stories from around the world from a female-focused lens, and that's really important to us. And so, yeah, I get to cover a lot of things that I care passionately about, especially within culture and the arts here in Australia.
Look, let's just jump in. Tell us about the book. What's your elevator pitch for the book? And anyone who's watching you might not know, the elevator pitch is basically the short and sharp version of the book that you would give to someone if they needed to know quickly what it's about. What's it about? How would you sum it up as an elevator pitch?
It's about a young woman in her early 20s who is trying to get back into playing the violin in an elite professional level after being a prodigy and having toured the world at a very young age. And now she's struggling with her competing desires to be a professional violinist, as well as negotiating her desires for the male gaze and to find romance and love through sex, which is the only way she feels is the pathway to power with men.
Well, let's start with the prodigy bit. Now, you trained as a violinist. How far did you go? You were on the cusp of doing it professionally, right?
Yeah. So I did all those grades and A mas, L mas, and I tried to pursue it professionally, but my technique was inevitably just not up to scratch, because, you know, we all know, violinists know how difficult that is.
Now, you taught at Merredin College in Strathfield, and I'm sure you came across your fair share of prodigies there.
I wouldn't say prodigies, but really talented young people, hardworking young girls.
Is this book in some ways a response to that idea that when your entire identity is kind of wrapped up in something you can do better than most people, and then as you get older you discover that actually you're just one of the crowd now? Is that part of it?
I think that's beautifully put, James. Definitely. Yeah. And the idea that we tend to label prodigies and young people who exhibit really astonishing skills at a young age, we conceptualize them in a way that means that they're reduced and they're not really seen as whole human beings.
So they're just little kids who can do something freakishly well.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you feel about this. I'll tell you how I feel. When I'm not a big fan of cooking shows anyway, but when they have the junior master chef and you've got 10-year-olds bursting into tears when someone they've never heard of walks into the room and they tell them they're the great chef, does that all strike you as just a little bit creepy?
I don't know. I know what you mean. I don't know if I would use the word creepy, but I feel like it, like the link that you draw with the MasterChef kids, it is a bit like the sort of the exploitation that we have adults over the sort of cuteness and vulnerability of young people.
Because they're modeling themselves after what they see grown-ups do on those shows, aren't they?
Exactly.
Did you see that kind of thing much in the music world? Modeling young musicians modeling themselves on, you know, behavior wise on the.
Absolutely. I think we revere young kids who are able to behave in a way that often adults behave, and there's something not quite right about that.
Yeah, I remember being at the Sydney Cricket Ground one day for a test match, and in the lunch break they had all the kids out there playing Kanga cricket, and there was one little guy who kept putting the ball over the fence. Everyone was just loving this kid, like, oh, he's amazing. And then he got out and threw his bat against the fence and stomped off, and suddenly 10,000 people turned on him and started booing him. And I thought it was a real, you know, that he was so petulant in his behaviour. And I wonder if that's part of the problem of Prodigy, if you like, that we set kids up to be successful. We don't actually teach them how to deal with the failure that inevitably comes with that. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, and prodigies, they live a life at the extremity of their life is that what happens is they gain a lot of attention at a very young age, at like this very concentrated period in their lives where they have never been given the opportunity to grow by themselves and to explore at an independent level their own agency and to learn to make mistakes. And that has consequences throughout their lives that I don't think people really care about. You know, if they just see a young child displaying astonishing skills, like adults just think, how do we capitalize on this? You know, that's all they're thinking about.
Yeah, I guess we see this in sport a lot, don't we, with the young tennis player who clearly is, you know, I guess, you know, I guess I'm drifting off topic a bit, but I remember Andre Agassi, who's of course married to Steffi Graf, you know, and I remember him saying that he's going to have no hesitation in saying to his kids, you never have to pick up a tennis racket if you don't want to, which I find kind of refreshing.
Yeah. Why do you find that refreshing?
I find it refreshing because, well, just because I would hate to be that kid and told because mummy and daddy were the best two tennis players in the world in their time, then you have to be good at that, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
So, were you considered a prodigy when you were playing?
No, far from it. I mean, I didn't even start until I was 9.
Oh, right. Oh, you're an old hand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because I remember when I was a kid and I was learning the violin. I was learning AMEB, but there were the other kids who were learning Suzuki.
Yep.
And these kids would get up in church. There'd be 4-year-olds playing Vivaldi.
Exactly.
And it always struck me as being a little bit metronomic. And I thought, they're not really playing. They're just putting one finger in front of the other.
Mm.
As a musician, you're interpreting other people's work. But
Mm.
as a writer, you're actually creating it yourself. Did you find that to be an interesting place to navigate?
Yeah, I think that's why I always found, I think that's why I've ended up as a writer, because I could not find myself being liberated in the artistic way that I desired through classical music, because I found myself ostensibly mirroring other people's way of performance, or, you know, just always playing music that had already been played for hundreds of years by countless people. I just felt like there was nothing original about what I could add to the canon, you know, in classical music. I felt
maybe if it had been 150 years ago, you would have invented jazz, right?
I wish, yeah. But yeah, I feel like there's more freedom through the written word.
Something I often say to students about writing when they talk about, you know, how do we know when something should be kept and something should be thrown away? And I'll say perhaps that thing you've just written isn't for anyone else's eyes. Maybe it's just the scales you do, like musical scales. You know, nobody expects you to pull out your A flat scale.
Yeah.
But you've certainly done it at some point if you're going to be a performance musician. What did you learn as a writer? And I guess we'll come back to this a little bit later in terms of your process, but as a writer, did you draw on that sense of discipline that you had to have as a musician?
I think so. And I think I didn't think about it consciously. Like I feel as though part of me wanted to write this book because I still carry a lot of shame about all the years and years of practice that I put into classical violin, and really doing it unconsciously. Like, I didn't really think about the real reason I wanted to do it, which was not a good reason, which is, you know, now that I see in hindsight that I wanted to do it, it was never for the artistic purpose. It was always because I wanted to penetrate a very elite white space in Australia, at least. You know, classical music is so elite and so exclusive. You know, the concert tickets cost so much to go see, you know, the SSO. But like, what I'm realizing now, having written this book, is that a lot of what I learned as a musician, you know, solitary confinement and all that, that's just has always come to me very naturally. And writing just feels really natural because I've spent so many years being alone in the practice room, practicing for hours, you know?
Yeah, because someone once asked you Hootie Menuhin after a recital, they said, I would give everything up to be able to play like you. And he, of course, his answer was, what do you think I did?
Yeah.
How do you find that you have to make sacrifices and turn in the pursuit of getting those words on the page?
I think the idea of sacrifice connotes the insinuation that you've had to give up something else that you love in order to do this other thing, like, right? And I've been thinking about this because I was asked this last night as well by another interviewer, and I don't think I have. I don't think I've given up anything, because I haven't loved anything more than writing. Like, I was first going to say maybe a social life, but like, I still see my friends very regularly and my family. Like, I still prioritize that. So I don't feel that I'm had to give up anything really important at the moment anyway.
Well, was there a moment then, because you talked about how music didn't fulfill you in the way that you'd hoped it would? Was there a moment when you suddenly realized, I know obviously you'd been writing in one way or another while the whole time through your childhood, you know, at school and so forth. Do you remember the moment when you looked at your writing and went, this is what I've been looking for all this time? Because you talk about, you say it's now the great love of your life, if you like, the thing that you love. Yeah. Was there a moment when you went, this is what I've been looking for?
What do you mean, this is what I've been looking for?
Well, you say that, you know, you're saying that music didn't fulfill you as, you know, as right. But writing has. Writing is the thing that you know, love more than anything. So perhaps not in terms of an agency looking for something, but was there a moment when you went, I've found, let's see, I'm using that connotation again. I
think I know what you mean. I know what you mean, so I'll try and answer to that.
Okay.
I don't think there was any one moment, but I felt more confident in letting myself publicize what I write, because I've written for years, but I never was confident enough to take it out into the public and enter competitions. And it's only when I started entering competitions that I was being read, because, you know, all writers need readers, right? And I'm sure there are millions of people out there who write, but they just don't have readers. And that's the only separation between, you know, one type of writer and another. And I just happened to have, like, a few years ago, had astonishingly encouraging friends who gave me the confidence to say, hey, this is good. And if you want to be a writer, then you need to be confident enough to go out and publish your work.
You don't think there's a place for people to just write for themselves?
Oh, definitely there is. But I think I wanted to feel like I was seen, and I didn't feel like that. And so I thought, well, I'm going to put myself out there, so at least I can see myself reflected. And
was that terrifying? I mean, I don't want to labour the parallels between music and writing, but I think that they are very strong parallels. And you know, in my musical life, I've often had people go, I'd love to get up at that open mic and perform, but I'm really scared. And to which my response is always, look, you know, if you're ever going to do it, the Family Hotel in Katoomba on a Wednesday night is the best place to do it, because people know that everyone's not professional and they're all going to tell you how great you were, even if you're a little bit crap.
Yeah.
What's the writing equivalent to that? Did you just bunch up your nerve and do it?
before I started sending out my writing to competitions, I performed a lot of open mic around the inner west, poetry. So I started off writing poetry, and I think because I wanted to just practice my public speaking skills, I just went like Monday, Tuesday nights, like the Friend in Hand in Glebe or the Herald, and I didn't know anyone there, and no one knew me. Like I would never invite any friends because I was too embarrassed, and so I did that often in my early 20s, just as a way to get rid of that fear of exposing myself.
I was actually thinking, before you used the term exposing yourself, I was thinking, I mean, I've never been to a clothing optional facility like a nude beach or whatever, but I imagine there's that moment where you just go, right, let's just do this, and you go. And do you remember the first time you actually really put something very personal out there into the public space in that setting?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe it was a poem about my mother, I think. Yeah.
And you sort of had to go, well, here we go. It's all or nothing now. That kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think because people respond to earnestness really well. And so and I've always been very earnest, maybe to a detrimental degree, but they like also the audience members in these, contexts, they're always very supportive. And also I was often the only person like under the age of 25. So like they would see me and think, what is this weird Asian girl by herself like doing? It's odd for a person to even rock up at a bar by themselves, and here I was, a stranger, nobody knew me, and I felt
talking about your mother. Yeah.
Maybe there was some form of liberation that I felt in doing that.
Which part of Western Sydney did you grow up in?
Carlingford.
Carlingford. Right. Yeah, okay. And which school did you go to? Can you tell us?
Carlingford High.
Which one?
I went to Carlingford High. Yeah.
Right. You've talked in other interviews I've read about your keenness to see more representative Asian voices in Australian writing, but presumably Carlingford High, you weren't in the minority in Carlingford High, right?
No, I think obviously they were quite more diverse than like say in a private school.
Right.
Yeah, but no, there were plenty of Asians where I grew up. Yeah.
Talk to us about about this idea that Asian stories are underrepresented in Australian literature.
I think overall we don't have many people of color in the arts, practicing in the arts. And I think the reason is twofold. One, it's not commercialized, so therefore it's not profitable. And two, a lot of us, we come from immigrant families who, one, just are not very rich, or like just don't have the means or support, the financial means to support someone to go through the arts, because a career in the arts is, like we all know, number one, it's not stable. Number two, it's not very lucrative. And also there's a culture around a lot of families from Asia that going into the arts is not very, it's not like elite. Like, there's a reason why Asian families want their kids to be lawyers or doctors, because there's a sort of, how we're also, Asians tend to be more, tend to care about what other people think. There's that, whole saving face aspect. And so it's hard for us to say, oh, I want to be creative. I want to go into this field where I might not earn more than 10 grand a year, because I have something to say. I have something to contribute to the society in a way that means that I am putting myself out there and creating a narrative for people to consume that is currently not out there.
I guess you've got the pressure of your family going, well, there's two problems with that. First, why don't you go and do a job that's going to pay you plenty of money and set you up? And secondly, stop airing our dirty laundry in public.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you get pushback from your family because you went off and did law, didn't you?
I studied music first.
Yeah.
And then I did law in my late 20s. Yeah.
And you completed your law degree and went on and became a lawyer?
No, I didn't become a lawyer. I practiced, I did the training for about 6 months. I worked in a legal firm for 6 months, and I decided it was not for me.
But you took something very valuable out of that, didn't you, in the character of Mark in your book?
I think going into law and also having been involved in politics during that time, it was very eye-opening. You learn about a very different and specific cohort in the society who maintain a very specific kind of power.
So what sort of years was this? What political era are we talking about? We're talking about the Julia Gillard years, or
2015.
Right.
Mm.
Let's talk about Mark then. Is Mark based on a particular person? I don't want to throw you under the bus in terms of anyone who might be watching this, but would any of these people look at the character of Mark in your book, who's a bit slimy, and go, "Oh my God, that's me"?
No. Mark is an amalgamation of things in my head, things that I've read, people I've come across. Yeah.
Your book's really about four things: race, sex (brackets addiction), loneliness, and giftedness is something that came up in one of the interviews I read as well. And we've kind of touched on the giftedness thing, but let's talk about the loneliness thing. And as I said earlier on, COVID has sort of thrown our loneliness into perspective in a couple of interesting ways. What's the loneliness you're talking about in this book?
It's the loneliness of wanting too much. I think there's a myriad of different aspects of different types of loneliness, but the loneliness specifically that Jena encounters is the one in which she finds that she's always wanting. And what happens when she finds herself wanting is she's always finding that there's a lack in her life. And that's where the source of her loneliness is. Like she always feels that there's some part of her life that is deficient. And there's a loneliness to that, this deficiency, and also having friends who don't really understand or mirror her sense of always wanting more. I think that's the type of loneliness that she experiences.
So it's the kind of loneliness that isn't really dependent on you being locked away in a place with no contact. It's more a loneliness based on feeling, well, to use the word you use, not being understood.
Yeah, or undesired in the way that she wants to be desired.
And how is that? How does she want to be desired?
Well, that's the thing. Like, she doesn't really know herself. And that's why she's so reckless with, putting her body out there and engaging with men in such a dangerous way, because she doesn't really know herself how she wants to be desired. And I feel like, women tend to not really know exactly what we want, because A, it changes all the time, but also B, we have had only, less than 200 years where we had a precedence of having stories and having our lives centered. And so we don't know exactly what we want, because, our history of feminism is still relatively short compared to, the history of civilization, I guess.
You've been quoted in your Guardian article or Guardian interview. You said, and you knew I was going to bring this up, and you said you don't mind addressing it. So, hey, well, I'm neither here nor there on this. I just want to hear your views. That you'll never read another book by a straight white male.
Another novel.
Oh, okay. That's a good distinction. So why that distinction?
Oh, because there's so many important subject matters that straight white male write about, like nonfiction books, that I don't really care. That doesn't really matter. That it doesn't matter as much about their lens. It matters about the subject matter. Like, yeah, and a lot of great art books have been written by straight white males. Like I look to nonfiction for purposes that are different in fiction. And the reason I don't want to read any novels by straight white men anymore is because number one, those books will always have audiences. People will always they will always have the platform to make a mark in society. They don't need me. Mm-hmm. And the second reason, probably the more important reason, is that I only have a limited number of hours in which to consume a book, and there are so many under-recognized voices from the marginalized groups in society where they haven't had the automatic platform that a straight white male has, where I feel like I want to give my attention to those people because they haven't had the precedence and the sort of assumed authority.
I'm going to put you on a spot then. Have you got a couple of names that we should be watching out for?
I'm just in the middle of reading this amazing book.
Revenge by SLM, Murder in
Yeah,
3 Parts.
and it's published by Transit Lounge. Exquisite book. Tiffany Tao is also an amazing writer based in Sydney. Michelle Law. There are so many Indigenous writers. Magabala books. They publish a lot of.
They're doing some great stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing, and I want to be able to dedicate my time into recognizing their works because they don't get the assumed authority that other people do.
Do you fear that by excluding or by not reading those books that you're going to miss a voice, that you're going to miss something great that someone says that you have by choice not engaged in?
Sure, I maybe will, but I'm trying to decolonize my mind because I've always thought, well, if I don't understand James Joyce or David Foster Wallace, there must be something wrong with me. I've always thought that. But, now I'm like, no, just because I don't understand David Foster Wallace doesn't mean I'm less intelligent than him,
Might be his fault for not being clearer, right?
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, this is a very reverse snobbery kind of thing to say, but I know that every year when I see the Booker Prize shortlist come out, I know that's 6 books I'm not going to have to bother with this year, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I noticed something else you said in one of your interviews where you said that growing up, every book, every artwork, every piece of music was written by a white guy. And I'm not going to disagree. I'm not going to disagree with you. I have some questions for your school if that was the case, but that it is what it is. What was the piece of art, be it a book, a painting, a sculpture, a piece of music by a woman that made you stand up and cheer?
I guess you mean when I was a teenager?
At all? Do you remember the first time you recognized something as being by a woman and just went, yes, finally somebody gets it?
Oh, I can't say. I don't have one. Like,
you don't have one?
No,
was
as in like
a creeping understanding of this, was it? Just...
my the everything that you said about the realization that actually didn't come at the point in which I saw a woman conduct something that spoke to me. It was I think it was me sitting down and I think I just started being very interested in visual arts, and then having read a lot of history of visual arts, especially the avant-garde period in the States during the 50s and 60s, I realized that there were no names that I'd recognized, and all these women were extremely, extremely talented, but yet the general consensus at that time just didn't think that they were good enough because they were all men, and the men didn't recognize or see themselves in the women's art, and so their women are now forgotten. That's how I came to realize that everything I've ever consumed has been like mostly adjudicated and judged through the eyes of men, and I thought that's not really fair.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying is that, certainly in the case of art, and presumably it was the case in music as well, I don't know, but on classical music, but certainly in art, you're suggesting that the work was being produced in many cases, but it just simply didn't get the exposure it needed.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and the reverence and the attention, like we don't have, how we have thousands of books written about James Joyce or Thomas Jefferson or Philip Larkin, autobiographies, but like we don't have that many people writing autobiographies of female artists in the past.
Were there any? I mean, we can name female artists that were or painters, Georgia O'Keeffe and people like this, and we can name writers like the Bronte sisters and so forth. Were there female classical musicians, composers around the time of the classical composers?
Fanny Mendelssohn, Clara Schumann, Lily Boulanger, very massive name. Mahler's wife, Alma,
Right.
she was a composer and performer. But all of those women were subject to the time in which they lived on this earth, which was that they were actively being suppressed and actively told that they're not worthy, that their artwork is not important. And that just breaks my heart and it makes me very angry.
Are there manuscripts available?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
See, I'm a bit ashamed to know that I didn't know those names. Yeah, so, but they just simply, and were they quite prolific, some of these women?
Yeah, Clara Schumann performed a lot during her life. But then once she got married, I think she had like 7 or 8 kids. And then Robert Schumann became the famous dude that people now remember. But no, I'd say within the classical music world, people do know that Clara Schumann was very much of her own elite status. But, you know, I think generally in the general public, people don't really know that she was a superstar.
And regardless of how good she was and how supportive her husband even might have been, even if he wasn't, but if he had been, I guess she was always behind the 8 ball in terms of what society would accept, wasn't she?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that clears that up for me. So thank you for that. I'm really embarrassed to know that to say that I didn't know about a lot of those female composers. That was a genuine question. That wasn't a setup. I really.
Oh no, that's fine.
Yeah. Jessie, thank you so much for talking with us. We really appreciate it. So the book is called "A Lonely Girl is a Dangerous Thing," and it's out. It came out at the beginning of August, didn't it?
July.
Beginning of July. And it's out through Allen Unwin, and it's available in all the usual places. Thank you so much for talking to us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, James. It's lovely.
All the best with the book.
Thank you so much.